Have you ever been in a situation where someone's actions left you speechless? Where you couldn't believe what you were witnessing, but knew something had to be done? Imagine this. A disabled man, struggling with life's everyday challenges, approaches a door, hoping for a simple act of kindness, and instead, it gets slammed right in his face. Can you picture it? How would you feel if you were the one on the receiving end of that door being slammed, a door that should have opened with compassion? The injustice, the humiliation, the sting of rejection. And yet, this story doesn't end with that painful moment. No, there's a twist coming, a lesson to be learned, but only if you stick around. I know you're here because, like me, you want to see what happens when people like this woman, who show cruelty to those who are most vulnerable, get a taste of their own medicine. But this story isn't just about the hurtful actions of one woman. It's about the power of standing up for what's right, about kindness in the face of cruelty, and about one unexpected neighbor who steps in and makes all the difference. This isn't just another feel-good story. It's a reality check, a reminder that our actions have consequences, and when we fail to show compassion, sometimes life steps in to teach us a lesson. As you watch this unfold, I want you to think about how often we encounter these moments of judgment and coldness in our daily lives. Maybe you've been on the receiving end of something like this. Maybe you've witnessed it. Or maybe you've even unknowingly been the one to show a lack of understanding. It's easy to fall into that mindset of being too busy, too self-absorbed, or just not thinking about the struggles of others. But this story, this one small moment in time, is about to reveal just how powerful empathy can be when it's used to turn a situation around. It's a call to action, a reminder that we all have the ability to change the course of someone's day, someone's life, with one simple act. But what happens when kindness isn't enough? When the woman who slammed the door doesn't understand the depth of her actions and continues to live her life without ever considering the impact on others? That's where the real twist comes in. There's a neighbor who's been quietly observing the entire situation, and when it's clear that the disabled man has been rejected and left out in the cold, she steps up. She doesn't just offer sympathy. She takes a stand. What does she do? How does she make this woman understand what she's done? And will the lesson be learned, or will it fall on deaf ears? You're probably wondering what happens next, right? You want to know how this neighbor teaches that woman a lesson she'll never forget. You're on the edge of your seat because you know this story is about more than just one person's actions. It's about all of us and how we all have the power to create change, to make a difference. But trust me, it's not just about the woman who slammed the door. It's about how a moment of cruelty can turn into something so much bigger when someone steps forward and shows the world the power of standing up for the vulnerable. It's about recognizing that we all have our moments of weakness, and sometimes it's the quiet voices, the ones you don't expect, that can create the most lasting change. So, why should you stick around? Because you deserve to know what happens when we take action in the face of injustice. You deserve to know the resolution to this powerful story. You want to see the moment when the lesson is learned, when the woman who thought she could get away with her actions is forced to confront the truth about how she's treated others. You don't want to miss the turning point, the key moment where everything shifts, where the wrongs are made right. I'm telling you right now, this story isn't over yet. You're only getting started. And if you stay with me, I promise you'll get the full picture, the resolution that leaves you thinking long after the video ends. Don't go anywhere. Keep watching because the best part is just around the corner. The tension is about to reach its peak, and you'll want to see how it all unfolds. So let me ask you, do you believe people can change? Can a single act of kindness break through years of indifference? Can someone who's been hurt, rejected, and dismissed ever find the strength to stand up for themselves and teach others a lesson in empathy and respect? I'm about to show you the answer. And trust me, it's going to hit home in ways you didn't expect. As the tension builds, let's take a closer look at the woman who slammed the door. Her name is Carol, and on the surface, she seems like just another busy, slightly annoyed neighbor. But there's more to her than meets the eye. Carol had always prided herself on being independent, self-sufficient, and in control of her life. She'd moved into the neighborhood about 5 years ago, and while she kept to herself, she often took pride in her routine, a predictable job at a law firm, a spotless home, and a steady social circle of friends who admired her sharp wit and no-nonsense attitude. She was the kind of person who didn't tolerate nonsense or weakness, or at least that's how she saw it. Her world was one of control, and the unexpected, the uncomfortable, the unpredictable, they were her enemies. When something threatened that control, she responded by retreating into herself, shutting others out. But that's the thing about people like Carol. You never really know what's going on beneath the surface. People like her are the type who often wear a mask, hiding behind a layer of cold efficiency. Behind closed doors, Carol wasn't just the confident, iron-willed woman her friends thought she was. In private, she struggled with a world that didn't always make sense. She had her own set of insecurities, fears, and hidden disappointments. It wasn't something she liked to talk about, but if you'd known her for long enough, you begin to notice the little cracks in her armor, the way she flinched when a conversation turned to compassion, or the faint look of irritation when a conversation didn't go her way. You see, Carol had been through her fair share of difficult experiences. She'd once been married to someone who, much like herself, had their own ideas about control, and the marriage had ended in a bitter divorce. Carol had never quite healed from it. She hadn't had much of a chance to, honestly. She threw herself into her work, into her home, and into the routines that kept her mind from wandering back to the pain of the past. She didn't have time for vulnerability, not in her personal life. But what she hadn't realized was that this emotional distance had begun to spill over into her relationships, including with her neighbors. And that's where the real story starts to unfold. It all started one chilly afternoon, when Carol came home to find the disabled man standing on her doorstep. His name was Thomas. Thomas had moved into the neighborhood a few months before, though Carol hadn't really paid him much attention until this moment. He had been in a wheelchair since an accident a few years ago, and while he managed on his own, life was definitely harder for him than for most people. But he wasn't one to ask for help, not even when he needed it. He had a quiet dignity about him, a strength that Carol couldn't fully grasp. Perhaps it was that quiet strength that had irritated her so much. She wasn't used to being confronted with someone who didn't make his struggles visible. Someone who didn't ask for pity or assistance. Someone who refused to play the role of the victim. On the day Carol slammed the door in his face, Thomas had been seeking assistance, not for himself, but for his elderly mother, who had just been admitted to the hospital. She had always been his primary concern, his reason for pushing through the daily obstacles of his life. Carol had no idea about his mother's illness, and frankly, she didn't care. In that moment, all she saw was an inconvenience, a man who was taking too long to explain what he needed and was making her feel, in her mind, unnecessarily guilty. His wheelchair blocked the entryway, and in Carol's tightly wound world, that was enough to set off a chain reaction of frustration. Without thinking, she slammed the door on him, shutting him out, never giving him the chance to fully speak. But there's something you should know about Carol's past, something that, at first glance, seems entirely unrelated. In her previous marriage, she had always been the one who kept everything in line, the one who held the power. Her ex-husband, a man she once thought she could trust, had turned out to be someone who took advantage of her sense of control. He used her fear of failure against her, manipulating her into staying in a toxic relationship longer than she should have. It wasn't until the divorce that Carol finally broke free, only to realize that the emotional scars of her marriage had left a mark on her, a mark that made her more resistant to vulnerability, more inclined to push others away when things got difficult. The truth was, Carol had never fully processed the pain of her divorce. She'd buried it so deep that she didn't even recognize it in herself anymore. Now, in her own neighborhood, when Thomas showed up at her door, she saw him as a reflection of everything she hated about her past. She saw a man who had limitations, who had a story she couldn't relate to or understand, and it made her uncomfortable. In her eyes, Thomas represented something she couldn't control, something that would demand her attention and pull her out of her carefully constructed world. And that's when she shut the door. She didn't see him as a person with his own challenges and his own life. She just saw a disruption to her well-ordered routine, a problem to be dismissed. But Carol didn't know what would happen next. She had no idea that the man she'd just rejected would become the catalyst for a lesson she'd never forget. What she didn't know was that Thomas wasn't the only one watching this unfold. No, there was someone else, someone who had been quietly observing the entire situation, and this person was about to change everything. This neighbor, a woman named Alice, had been living across the hall from Carol for years. Alice had seen Carol's patterns, had witnessed the occasional cracks in her exterior. And when she saw Carol's reaction to Thomas, Alice knew it was time to step in. She wasn't about to let this moment pass without doing something about it. But just as Alice prepared to take action, a new layer of suspicion started to form. Was Alice really doing this out of pure compassion, or did she have her own hidden reasons for stepping into this situation? Was there a deeper connection between Alice and Thomas that Carol didn't know about? Was Alice merely playing the role of the hero, or was she manipulating the situation for her own benefit? The deeper Alice got involved, the more questions seemed to arise, and the more complicated the situation became. Was this all a coincidence, or was something more sinister at play? And now, as we continue, the question remains, how far will Alice go to teach Carol a lesson? And what does it mean for both women as the tension between them reaches a boiling point? Stay with me, because the real mystery is just beginning, and the twists that lie ahead will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this story. As Alice began to take steps toward uncovering the truth, she quickly realized that nothing was as simple as it first seemed. It wasn't just about showing Carol the error of her ways anymore. No, there was something deeper here, something buried beneath the surface that Alice hadn't anticipated. She thought she was acting out of pure concern for Thomas, but the more she got involved, the more she began to question everything and everyone around her. It started with a strange incident just a few days after Alice decided to step in. She had been gathering evidence, talking to a few of the neighbors who had witnessed Carol's behavior. Alice was hoping to get their support, but as she made her way down the hall, she noticed something unsettling. The letter Thomas had left for Carol, the one in which he explained why he was at her door that day, had disappeared. It wasn't just misplaced or forgotten, it was gone. Alice had seen it just the night before, sitting on the hallway table outside Carol's apartment, and now it was nowhere to be found. The sudden disappearance of such a key piece of evidence made Alice's skin crawl. Who could have taken it, and why? Was Carol trying to cover up the truth? Or had someone else gotten involved in ways Alice didn't fully understand? Alice's suspicions began to grow as she searched the hallways for any clues. But it wasn't just the missing letter that threw her off. A strange feeling began to settle in her stomach. Something about the neighbors' reactions when she asked questions didn't sit right. Some of them avoided eye contact, while others quickly shut down when she mentioned Thomas or Carol. It was as if they were afraid of something or someone. But why? Why were people so hesitant to talk? What was it that they were hiding? And more importantly, who was keeping secrets from her? It wasn't long before Alice discovered another strange detail. Carol wasn't the only one who seemed to be keeping quiet. Her closest ally in the building, a man named Greg, who had always been friendly and supportive, started acting suspiciously. At first, Alice thought it was just coincidence, but the more she dug, the more his behavior raised red flags. He would show up at all the wrong moments, trying to steer Alice away from questions she was asking. When Alice mentioned the missing letter to him, Greg brushed it off, claiming it was probably just misplaced, and insisted she drop the whole thing. He had a way of making it seem like she was overreacting, like she was making a mountain out of a molehill. But something in his tone didn't sit right with Alice. Greg seemed to know too much, and yet he wasn't offering any real help. Why was he so eager to silence her? The more Alice looked into Greg's history, the more she realized there was a hidden connection between him and Carol. They had known each other before either of them had moved into the building, a fact that Alice hadn't known. But this wasn't just a casual acquaintance. There were whispers, things that didn't add up. Was it possible that Greg was involved in something darker than just being a helpful neighbor? Was he covering for Carol, or was he working with someone else altogether? Then, things took an even more dangerous turn. Late one night, Alice received a mysterious message from an unknown number. The message was brief but chilling. Stop digging. You don't want to know what's really going on here. It was a warning, a direct threat, but who sent it?
And why?
Was it Carol trying to intimidate her? Or was it someone else who had a vested interest in keeping the truth hidden? Alice couldn't shake the feeling that someone powerful was trying to shut her down before she uncovered something bigger than she could have ever imagined. But Alice wasn't the type to back down. She knew she was close, too close to the truth, and no matter how much resistance she faced, she wasn't going to stop now. However, that didn't mean it was going to be easy. As the days passed, things started to get stranger. Carol's behavior became even more erratic. She'd snap at anyone who asked about Thomas, going so far as to accuse people of meddling in her business. But what was she hiding? And why was she so defensive? Could she really be the person behind all these disappearances, all the lies? There were moments when Alice started to question her own sanity. Was she seeing connections that didn't exist? Or was there a deeper conspiracy at play, one that reached further than she could imagine? With every step closer she got to the truth, it seemed like someone, somewhere, was doing everything in their power to stop her from uncovering what had really happened. And just when Alice thought she was making headway, another piece of the puzzle seemed to disappear. One afternoon, as she was going through some old documents she had gathered about the building's residents, Alice came across a name she hadn't seen before, a name that didn't belong to anyone she recognized. It was written on an old property transfer record, connected to an address Carol had lived at years ago. Was this a coincidence? Or was there something more to Carol's past than she had let on? The deeper Alice dug, the more questions piled up. Why was this name linked to Carol? And what did it mean for Thomas and the mysterious events unfolding? But just as Alice was about to confront Greg with her newfound information, something happened that stopped her in her tracks. She found herself being followed. Someone was watching her every move, someone who didn't want her to dig any deeper. The tension was rising, and Alice could feel herself being pulled into something far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they weren't fitting together the way Alice had hoped. Every answer she uncovered only led to more questions, and the threat of what might be lurking in the shadows grew with each passing day. Was Carol involved in something bigger? Was Greg playing both sides? Or was there someone else pulling the strings from behind the scenes? Alice didn't know who she could trust anymore. The line between right and wrong had blurred, and she was left wondering if the truth was even worth uncovering. Would it be the end of her search, or would she find herself dragged deeper into a web of secrets and betrayal she was never meant to uncover? As the tension escalates and the danger looms closer, Alice realizes that she may be the only one standing between the truth and a massive, potentially devastating secret. But with so many forces working against her, will she be able to expose the truth before it's too late? Or will this dark mystery swallow her whole? Stay tuned, because the twists are far from over, and what's coming next might change everything. Just when Alice thought she was beginning to piece things together, the story took another unexpected turn. Her focus had been entirely on Carol, on Greg, on the hidden letters and the cryptic messages that had been leading her down a winding path of uncertainty. But it wasn't just Alice who was starting to feel the heat. Someone close to her was now involved in a way she never saw coming, her best friend, Sarah. Sarah had always been Alice's confidant, the one person who knew all the details of her life, including her growing obsession with the mystery surrounding Carol. For weeks, Sarah had been urging Alice to take a step back, telling her that it was getting too dangerous, that sometimes it was better to walk away before things escalated beyond control. But Alice, determined to uncover the truth, had refused to listen. That was until one afternoon when Sarah received a message, almost identical to the one Alice had received weeks before. The text read, "Stop digging. You're getting too close. This isn't your fight." It was short, threatening, and chilling in its implications. Sarah's hands shook as she showed Alice the message. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Alice felt the cold, tight grip of fear tighten around her chest. She wasn't alone in this anymore, and the message made it clear that whoever was behind this wasn't afraid to go after people close to her. For the first time, Alice started to question if this was worth it. Was the truth really worth the danger it was bringing to those she cared about? And if so, what did that say about the people she had been trusting? As if that wasn't enough, a few hours later, Alice stumbled upon something that completely contradicted what she had believed all along. She had been combing through old records and neighbor testimonies, looking for any clue that might lead her to the person responsible for the mysterious disappearances and threats. It wasn't until she came across a seemingly insignificant piece of paper buried in a stack of files that she realized how wrong she had been. The document was a receipt, nothing more than a standard transaction log, but the name on it caught Alice's eye. It was the name of a contractor, someone who had worked on repairs in the building just a few months ago. At first, Alice didn't think much of it. The contractor's name wasn't someone she'd ever heard of before. But as she traced the details on the receipt, she realized that the contractor had done work specifically in Carol's apartment, not just the minor repairs she'd mentioned to Alice before, but major renovations. Why hadn't Carol mentioned this? Why had she kept it hidden? Could it be related to the larger mystery? And why did the dates on the receipt overlap with the time when the strange occurrences started happening? The revelation sent Alice's mind into overdrive. If Carol had been involved in a larger scheme, it was starting to look like she wasn't working alone. And if someone else had been helping her behind the scenes, what else were they hiding? Alice's heart raced as she realized that the web she was unraveling was far more complicated than she could have imagined. The stakes had just been raised, and now, not only was her own safety at risk, but Sarah's as well. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to silence Alice. They were willing to go after the people she loved. With that realization, everything Alice thought she knew about the situation started to shift. The contractor, the missing evidence, the cryptic threats, they were all connected in a way she couldn't yet understand. But there was one thing she knew for sure. The closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. The pieces weren't fitting together as neatly as they had before, and Alice realized that she might have been too focused on Carol and Greg, thinking they were the key to everything. But what if the truth wasn't in them? What if someone else, someone completely unexpected, was behind the mystery all along? And then, as if to confirm her worst fears, something even stranger happened. Late one night, when Alice was going over her notes and trying to make sense of the contractor's involvement, she received another message. This one wasn't a text. It was an email sent from an untraceable address, with no subject line, no signature, just a single sentence. "You're looking in the wrong places. Stop before it's too late." Alice stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. The message wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge, a taunt. Someone was playing games with her, and it was clear they knew exactly what she was doing, where she was looking, and how close she was to uncovering the truth. As the pieces of the puzzle scattered across the table, Alice realized how little she truly understood about the situation. Was Greg working with Carol? Was Sarah in danger because of her involvement? And who was this mysterious contractor, really? What was his role in all of this? The email wasn't just a threat. It was a sign that there was someone else pulling the strings, someone who had been behind the scenes the entire time, orchestrating events in a way Alice hadn't even considered. As the night wore on, Alice's mind raced with questions. The deeper she dug, the more she realized that the truth might be more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And yet, she couldn't stop herself. She couldn't walk away now, not when she was so close. The mystery had her in its grip, and she wasn't about to let go, no matter the cost. But the question remained, who was playing this game, and how far were they willing to go to keep their secrets hidden? With every new twist, every new revelation, the stakes were growing higher. And just when Alice thought she might be closer to the truth, another piece of the puzzle slipped through her fingers. It was a race against time, and the danger was only just beginning. Would Alice uncover the truth before it was too late, or would she become another pawn in someone else's game? The answer to that question was still hanging in the balance, and the tension was only going to rise from here. Stay with us, because this story is far from over, and the twists and turns that lie ahead will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. The creeping sense of dread that had been gnawing at Alice's insides for days finally erupted into something more tangible, more real, than she could have ever imagined. What had started as an investigation into a seemingly simple act of cruelty was now spiraling into a nightmare, and Alice found herself trapped in the middle of it. Every step she took felt as if it was being shadowed by an unseen force, a presence that lurked just out of sight, but always near enough to make her heart race with fear. The constant weight of the unknown was pressing down on her, and she could no longer deny the terrifying truth. She wasn't just investigating a mystery anymore. She was being hunted. It started with the feeling of being watched. At first, Alice brushed it off as paranoia, a side effect of digging into something that clearly wasn't meant to be uncovered. But then the signs became undeniable. It wasn't just the occasional glance from a passerby that seemed too intentional, or the way someone would always be just a little too close behind her when she turned a corner. It was the fact that she started noticing the same black car parked across the street from her apartment every time she came home. The same car that didn't belong to anyone she recognized. The same car that seemed to just be there, even when Alice had been out for hours, when no one could possibly have been expecting her. It wasn't just coincidence anymore. Someone was following her. Someone was watching her every move. The next evening, as Alice returned from one of her increasingly tense meetings with Sarah, she felt a surge of panic when she noticed the car again, parked in the same spot. But this time, she did something she hadn't done before. She took a breath, steeled herself, and decided to confront it. She crossed the street, her footsteps quick and nervous. When she reached the car, her heart skipped a beat. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but her gut told her that whoever was in there knew she was coming. The feeling of being stalked intensified with every step she took. Her hand hovered over her phone in her pocket, ready to call for help, but when she looked over her shoulder, the car's engine revved, and it quickly pulled away, disappearing into the night. Alice stood frozen for a long moment, her mind racing. It wasn't just the car that bothered her. It was the knowledge that whoever was following her had been doing so for days, maybe even longer, and it was only now that she was starting to feel the full weight of the danger. Whoever this person was, they were patient. They were watching her, and they weren't about to let her find the answers she was so desperately seeking. As the days went by, Alice's fears only deepened. Sarah, too, had begun to feel the unsettling presence of something amiss. She hadn't said much about it, but Alice could see the change in her eyes, the nervous glances, the way she'd check over her shoulder when they walked through the neighborhood. It was clear to Alice that whatever was happening, it was reaching a boiling point, and neither she nor Sarah were safe anymore. The stakes were higher now, and Alice could no longer ignore the gravity of the situation. The mystery, once just an investigation, had become something far darker, something personal. Then, just when Alice thought she might be losing her mind with the stress and the uncertainty, something happened that left her breathless with shock. Sarah vanished. One moment, she was there, texting Alice about meeting up to go over their latest findings, and the next, she was gone. Alice's phone buzzed late that night with a text from Sarah, but it wasn't a text at all. It was a photo. A dark, blurry image of Sarah's apartment door slightly ajar, a shadowy figure standing in the hallway, just barely visible. The caption read, "You're next." Alice's heart sank into her stomach. Panic gripped her chest, and for the first time in days, her mind went completely blank. She tried calling Sarah, but the phone just rang and rang, unanswered. She texted, left messages, even tried reaching out to the building's management, but it was as if Sarah had simply disappeared into thin air. The chilling image replayed in her mind, and it was clear that whoever had been following her, whoever had been leaving cryptic messages and warnings, was now targeting the people she cared about. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Who was behind this? Was it Carol? Greg? Or was someone else entirely pulling the strings, someone who had been in the background all along? The fact that Sarah was now a target, that she had been dragged into this mess, made Alice feel more isolated and vulnerable than ever. She wasn't just trying to solve a mystery anymore. She was fighting for survival, fighting to protect the only person who had stood by her through it all. But even worse than the fear gripping her heart was the terrifying realization that she had no answers. There were no clear paths to follow, no sense of direction. It was as if the whole situation had been carefully orchestrated, like a game of cat and mouse, and Alice was the mouse. Every time she thought she was getting closer to the truth, every time she uncovered a new piece of the puzzle, it seemed to slip through her fingers, leaving her in an even deeper web of uncertainty. As Alice sat alone in her apartment that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse was coming, that the next move in this twisted game was already in motion. Sarah's disappearance was only the beginning. She could feel it in her bones. Whoever was behind all of this, whoever had been pulling the strings from the shadows, wasn't finished yet. They were getting closer, and Alice didn't know how much longer she could keep running before she was caught. The feeling of being hunted was all-consuming now. Every noise, every shadow, every creak of the floorboards made Alice's pulse spike. She knew she had to act fast, but with no clear lead and no one she could trust, she felt more helpless than ever. Time was running out, and the walls were closing in. The deeper she went, the more she realized that her pursuit of the truth had already cost her more than she ever could have imagined. But the worst part? She had no idea who the real enemy was. She had no idea who she was really up against. And so, with Sarah's disappearance hanging over her like a dark cloud, Alice was faced with a terrifying choice. Keep going down this rabbit hole, knowing it could cost her everything, or walk away and risk losing the truth and the people she loved forever. But no matter which path she chose, one thing was clear. The mystery was far from over, and the danger was only just beginning. The clock was ticking, and with every passing moment, the stakes grew higher. Just when Alice thought she was on the brink of unraveling the mystery, the truth hit her like a sledgehammer, shattering everything she thought she knew about the situation. For days, she had been fixated on the idea that someone was targeting her, that there was an enemy lurking in the shadows, pulling strings and pushing her to the edge. But what if the enemy wasn't some mysterious figure at all? What if the truth was far darker, far closer to home than she could ever have imagined? It all began with a single, unexpected phone call late one evening, when Alice had just about given up on finding any answers. She had been pacing her apartment, replaying every moment, every conversation, every clue she'd gathered, when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, expecting yet another call from an unknown number or some junk solicitation, but the name that appeared on the caller ID stopped her dead in her tracks. It was Greg, her ex-husband. The one person she hadn't spoken to in months. The one person she'd tried to keep out of this whole mess. He was the last person she expected to hear from now. Alice hesitated for a moment before answering, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know why he was calling, but deep down, she feared it had something to do with everything that had been happening. Alice. Greg's voice came through the line, strained and almost breathless. You need to listen to me. I don't know how much time we have before they come for you, but you have to get out of there right now. The urgency in his voice was enough to make Alice's stomach drop. She couldn't understand what he was saying. She couldn't understand why he was calling her now, after everything that had happened between them. What do you mean? Who's coming for me? What's going on, Greg? There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again. I never wanted you to get involved in this. But it's too late now. They know you're close. They know you're digging into things you shouldn't have. And if you don't leave, if you don't get away from them, you're going to be their next target. Alice felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as a wave of panic washed over her. Who's they, Greg? What are you talking about? What does this have to do with me? Greg sighed, the sound filled with guilt and regret. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. But Alice, trust me. The person you're looking for, the person who's been following you, threatening you, it's not just some random stalker. It's me. I was the one who planted those messages. I was the one who made it look like you were being hunted. Alice's mind froze. Her thoughts swirled in a vortex of disbelief. Her heart pounded so loudly in her ears she couldn't even process what he had just said.
What? Why?
Why would you do that, Greg? Because I had no choice, he said, voice cracking. There's more to this than you think, Alice. There's a reason you were dragged into this. A reason you're still here, still alive, and why I've been keeping you in the dark all this time. The truth is, I never wanted to hurt you, but I was forced to protect you, and I couldn't do it any other way. The line went dead, leaving Alice reeling, her mind racing with questions. It took her a long time to pull herself together enough to make sense of what he had just revealed. It was too much to process all at once. But one thing was undeniable. Everything she had believed, all the fear, the paranoia, the sense of being hunted, had been a carefully constructed lie, a manipulation orchestrated by someone she had trusted. And now, she was stuck in the middle of it all, unsure of who she could trust, unsure of what was real. She replayed Greg's words over and over in her mind, trying to make sense of them. What did he mean when he said she was dragged into this? Who was forcing him to keep these secrets? And why had he gone to such lengths to create this elaborate web of lies? Was it really about protecting her, or was there something more sinister at play? But the twist didn't end there. Alice's phone buzzed again, this time with a message that made her blood run cold. It was from an unknown number, one she didn't recognize. The message read, "You're not the only one being watched. And neither are your friends. You should have listened to Greg." That one line, that single phrase, opened up a floodgate of new questions. Who had sent the message? And how did they know about Greg's involvement? Suddenly, Alice wasn't just questioning Greg anymore. She wasn't even sure if he was the person she needed to fear. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had no idea who was orchestrating all of this. She didn't know who the real puppet master was, or what they wanted from her. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Alice found herself caught in a game that was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Every person she had trusted, every person who had seemed like an ally, now seemed like a potential suspect. Could Greg be telling the truth? Or had he been lying to her all along, weaving a web of deception so intricate that even she couldn't see the full scope of it? Was Sarah's disappearance connected to Greg's lies? And why had he never told her about the true nature of the threat? Everything Alice thought she knew about this mystery was crumbling in front of her eyes. She was now trapped in a world of lies, deception, and manipulation, with no clear way out. The lines between friend and foe had blurred so much that Alice didn't even know who to trust anymore. With every answer she found, more questions arose, and the danger surrounding her only seemed to grow. The only thing Alice could be sure of now was that she was running out of time. Whoever was behind this, whoever was pulling the strings, was always one step ahead, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. Alice's only hope now was to find the truth before it was too late, but with every turn she took, the truth seemed more and more elusive. She had to ask herself, was she truly in control of this investigation, or was she simply a pawn in a much larger game? And if she was a pawn, who was the one making the moves? The tension in Alice's life had reached a breaking point, and it wasn't just the mounting mystery that was wearing her down. It was the gut-wrenching realization that every decision she made from here on out would force her to either give up the truth or risk losing everything she held dear. The stakes had escalated beyond just her own safety. Now, people she cared about were being dragged into the chaos, their lives hanging by a thread, all because of the web of lies and secrets that had been spun around her. She was on the verge of unraveling something much bigger than herself, but the price of that truth was about to be too high for her to bear. The message from the unknown number haunted her, and the truth that Greg had hinted at was now a constant shadow over her every move. The next day, she found herself standing outside her best friend Sarah's apartment, staring at the door, her hand shaking as she reached for the doorknob. Sarah was the one person she had been able to rely on throughout all of this, but the more Alice thought about it, the more she realized that Sarah might know something she wasn't telling her. Could it be that Sarah was involved in the plot too? Or was it simply her own paranoia that was making her see betrayal where none existed? Alice had no choice but to confront Sarah. There was no other way. She couldn't keep going in circles, chasing answers without getting to the heart of the matter. She needed to know if Sarah had been hiding something from her all this time. The door swung open before Alice could knock, and there stood Sarah, her face brightening at the sight of Alice. But something in Sarah's eyes flickered, a momentary hesitation that Alice couldn't ignore. "Hey, you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice softer than usual, almost as if she knew exactly what was coming. Alice hesitated, her throat tight. There was no easy way to start this conversation. She couldn't sugarcoat it anymore, couldn't pretend like everything was fine when her entire world was falling apart around her. "Sarah, we need to talk," Alice said, her voice thick with the weight of everything that had happened. "I need to know the truth. All of it. And I need you to tell me right now. Are you involved in this? Have you been hiding something from me?" The words were out before she could stop them, and Sarah's expression immediately darkened. For a moment, there was complete silence, the air thick with the unspoken. Alice watched Sarah carefully, waiting for some sign, some indication that she was either guilty or innocent. But Sarah didn't speak, didn't offer any reassurance. Instead, her gaze shifted uneasily to the side, as if she was choosing her next words carefully. "I don't know what you mean," Sarah finally said, her voice trembling just enough for Alice to catch it. "What are you talking about? You're scaring me, Alice." Alice's heart pounded, but she pushed forward, desperation edging her voice. "The messages, Sarah. The threats. You've been here all along. And I need to know if you've been part of it. If you've been hiding things from me." The look in Sarah's eyes faltered for a split second before she blinked it away, almost as if she were suppressing something. Then, the words that came next hit Alice like a punch in the gut. "I'm not the one you need to be worried about," Sarah said quietly, almost too calmly. "It's Greg. He's been lying to you from the start. He's been pulling the strings all along." Alice froze, every muscle in her body locking in place. She wanted to deny it, to tell Sarah she was wrong, that Greg was just trying to protect her. But deep down, she knew Sarah wasn't just saying this to hurt her. Sarah wasn't just throwing Greg under the bus for no reason. There was something real in her voice, something that sent a chill down Alice's spine. "I don't know what's going on," Sarah continued, "but I do know this. Greg isn't the person you think he is. And if you keep digging, if you keep pushing for answers, it's not just your life that's going to be in danger. You're putting everyone around you at risk. You're already in too deep, Alice." The words hit Alice like a hammer, and for the first time in days, she was at a loss for what to do. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Should she believe Sarah? Should she trust her when everything in her was telling her that someone had to be playing a game with her? Her instincts were screaming at her to get out of this situation, to walk away from the danger, but her determination for the truth held her rooted to the spot. "I don't know if I can just walk away from this, Sarah," Alice said, her voice cracking as she fought to keep her emotions in check. "This isn't just about me anymore. People are getting hurt, and I can't let that happen. If I stop now, I'll never know the truth. And what if someone else gets hurt? What if I'm the only one who can stop this?" Sarah's face softened, and for a moment, Alice thought she saw a flicker of genuine concern in her eyes. But then, without warning, Sarah stepped back, closing the door between them, her voice strained with finality. "Then you make your choice, Alice. You can either protect yourself and everyone you love, or you can dig deeper into this mess, knowing that you might never get out of it alive." The door shut with a heavy thud, and Alice was left standing in the hallway, her breath shallow, her mind spinning in every direction. The ultimatum Sarah had given her was unthinkable, but Alice couldn't ignore the warning. She had to choose. Should she back off, protect herself, and pretend like nothing was happening? Or should she risk everything, her safety, her relationships, her sanity, to uncover the truth and bring justice to those responsible? In that moment, Alice realized that she wasn't just facing a dangerous game of deception and manipulation. She was standing at a crossroads, and the choice she made now would determine everything. The stakes had never been higher, and no matter which path she chose, she knew that the consequences would be felt for the rest of her life. Alice couldn't escape the heavy weight of Sarah's words, and the hours that followed only deepened the gnawing feeling in her gut. Everything she thought she knew was starting to crumble, and now, more than ever, it felt like she was caught in a vast, tangled web of lies, deceit, and manipulation. What she'd been chasing wasn't just some personal vendetta or isolated threat. It was a conspiracy, something much darker, more dangerous, and far-reaching than she ever could have imagined. But who could she trust now? Every person who'd been close to her had become a potential threat, every conversation a possible trap. Her mind raced as she replayed the moments with Greg, the way his explanations always seemed a little too rehearsed, a little too perfect. The pieces of the puzzle she had been so desperate to solve were now scattered across a vast landscape of shadows and suspicion. What was it that Greg had been hiding from her all this time? Was he just playing her, using her trust to manipulate her into doing his bidding? Or was there something far worse going on, something that tied him directly to the forces working against her? The phone call came like a punch to the chest. It was Greg. His voice, once a source of comfort, now sounded hollow, cold, as if a mask had slipped off, revealing a side of him she hadn't been prepared for. "We need to talk." Greg's voice crackled over the line, his words sharp-clipped. "I don't have much time, but you need to know something. You're in more danger than you realize. People you don't know are watching you." Alice felt a chill sweep over her, but she pushed past it, the need for answers overriding her fear. "What's going on, Greg? What are you talking about? You need to tell me the truth right now." There was a pause on the other end, a beat of silence that stretched far too long. When Greg spoke again, his voice dropped to a whisper, as though he were trying to keep his words hidden from the very people who might be listening in. "It's not just about you, Alice. You've been caught up in something much bigger, and you've been walking right into it without even realizing it. The people behind this, they've been manipulating everything from the start, pulling strings you never knew existed." Alice's pulse quickened, her thoughts spinning out of control. "What are you saying? Who are these people?" Greg's voice was tense now, full of urgency. "I can't say too much. If they know I'm talking to you, everything's over. But I'll give you one name: Sarah. You need to stay away from her. She's not who you think she is." Alice's heart skipped a beat, a deep sense of betrayal sinking in. Sarah? She couldn't believe it. Sarah, the one person who had been by her side through all of this, was now suddenly the person Greg was warning her about. Could it be true? Could Sarah really be involved in this mess? Before Alice could say anything else, Greg cut her off. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I've said too much." The line went dead. The silence that followed was suffocating. Alice stood frozen in place, her mind struggling to make sense of what she had just heard. The pieces were scattered, out of reach, and no matter how hard she tried to put them together, the picture was still too blurry, too confusing. But one thing was clear: she had underestimated everything. She had been playing a game she didn't fully understand, and now she was caught in the middle of something much darker than she had ever imagined. The conspiracy wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about Sarah or Greg. It involved far more people, and it stretched far beyond anything she could have conceived. Her heart pounded as her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Greg or Sarah. The message was short, but it sent a chill through her bones. "You're too close. Leave this alone now, or there will be consequences." The message was anonymous, but its intent was clear. Whoever had sent it was watching her, and they knew what she was doing. Alice was caught in a vice, and the pressure was mounting. Everywhere she turned, there were obstacles, dead ends, and threats. But there was no turning back now. She had come too far to back down. The puzzle was more intricate than she ever could have guessed, and the people who were pulling the strings were hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Alice's mind raced as she thought about everything that had happened: the mysterious messages, the cryptic warnings, and now the strange behavior of the people she thought she could trust. She'd been played, manipulated, used, and now the stakes had risen to an impossible height. The danger wasn't just about her anymore. There were bigger forces at play, and if she didn't move fast, if she didn't expose the truth before it was too late, there was no telling how far the conspiracy would go. The walls were closing in, and Alice knew one thing for sure: someone was about to make a move. She wasn't going to let them control her anymore. She would fight, but the price of the truth was more than she could ever have prepared for. The question was no longer whether she could uncover the truth. It was whether she could survive long enough to see it. The night air hung heavy with tension as Alice made her way to the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The message had been clear, and the stakes had never felt higher. This was the moment she had been building toward for weeks. It had taken every ounce of courage she had left to step into the lion's den, but she couldn't turn back now. The whispers, the warnings, the secrets, it was all coming to a head tonight, and she was determined to get answers. She had pieced together enough to know that the people behind this conspiracy weren't just after her. They had been orchestrating everything from the shadows, manipulating everyone in her life for their own gain. But what she still couldn't understand was why. What did they want? What had she unknowingly become a part of? The puzzle pieces were scattered, but she knew that tonight, in this place, they would finally fall into place. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped into the dimly lit warehouse, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence. The air smelled musty, and the faint hum of machinery in the background only added to the sense of foreboding. She wasn't alone. She could feel it. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and every instinct screamed at her to turn and run. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when she was so close. Suddenly, a voice pierced the silence, cold and calculating. "You shouldn't have come here, Alice." She froze. It was Sarah. Alice's stomach twisted. She had trusted Sarah, confided in her, believed in her. But now, standing in front of her, Sarah looked different, colder, more distant, like a stranger. The warmth that had once radiated from her was gone, replaced by something much darker. "Why, Sarah?" Alice's voice cracked as she stepped forward, unable to keep the disbelief from her tone. "Why didn't you tell me the truth? What is this all about?" Sarah's lips curled into a cruel smile, and for the first time, Alice saw the glint of something dangerous in her eyes. "You were always going to figure it out, Alice. I knew that. I just didn't think you'd be so stubborn about it." Alice felt a rush of anger flood her chest, but it quickly melted into confusion. "What do you mean? I trusted you. I thought we were in this together." Sarah's laugh was low, almost sinister, and it echoed off the walls of the warehouse. "We were never in this together, Alice. You were just a pawn in a much bigger game." Before Alice could react, a shadow moved from behind Sarah, and out of the darkness stepped Greg. Alice's heart skipped a beat, and she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Greg. The man who had been her rock, the one person who had always been there for her. And now, standing before her, he was part of this twisted conspiracy. "I didn't want you to find out this way," Greg said quietly, his voice laced with regret. "But I couldn't keep lying to you." Alice's head was spinning. "What is this?
Who are you people?"
Why are you doing this?" Greg sighed, his expression hardening. "It's not personal, Alice. This has been about much bigger things from the start. You've been in the middle of something you couldn't possibly understand." Suddenly, Alice's mind clicked. All the pieces, all the strange behavior, the cryptic warnings, the lies, it all made sense now. She had been a pawn in a larger scheme, manipulated by people who saw her as nothing more than a tool. But what was their endgame? Why had they targeted her? "I can't let you stop this," Sarah said, her tone chilling. "There's too much at stake. You don't understand how dangerous it is to stand in the way of what's coming." Before Alice could respond, a loud crash sounded from the far side of the warehouse, and the lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Something, or someone, had triggered the noise, and the chaos that followed only made the tension thicker. Alice instinctively took a step back, her pulse racing as the air around her seemed to grow even heavier. In that split second of distraction, Sarah lunged forward, her hand reaching for something at her side. Alice barely had time to react as she sidestepped, her heart pounding as the reality of the situation hit her like a freight train. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was about survival. And as Sarah's hand gripped the object, a gun, Alice's breath caught in her throat. "You won't make it out of here alive, Alice," Sarah said, her voice steady, unwavering. "None of you will." It was as if time slowed down. The gun in Sarah's hand seemed to shimmer with danger, and Alice's instincts screamed at her to run, to escape, to fight back. But then, just as the air seemed to freeze, another figure emerged from the darkness. It was Greg, but this time, he wasn't alone. Someone else had joined the fray, someone Alice had never expected. Her own father. "Put the gun down, Sarah." Her father's voice was firm, commanding, as he stepped into the light. "This ends tonight." Alice's breath caught in her throat. Her father? What was he doing here? How was he involved in all of this? The room seemed to tilt, spinning wildly as she tried to process the impossible reality unfolding before her. Sarah's expression darkened, and in that instant, Alice realized with horror that this was no longer just about her. It was about everything. The conspiracy, the lies, the betrayal, it had all led to this one terrifying moment. "You think you can stop this?" Sarah sneered at her father. "You've been a part of this for far longer than you realize." And that's when the twist came, the final bombshell that Alice never saw coming. Her father wasn't just a bystander. He was the mastermind behind it all. The world around Alice seemed to collapse in that moment, the weight of her father's confession pressing down on her chest like an unbearable stone. The air was thick with disbelief as she stood there, stunned, unable to process the revelation that had shattered everything she thought she knew. Her father, the man who had always been her protector, her guide, had orchestrated the very conspiracy that had torn her life apart. The room seemed to spin, her mind racing to understand how she could have missed the signs. But then, the truth was undeniable. He had been playing both sides from the start. For a long moment, Alice stood frozen, her gaze locked with her father's. His face, once a source of comfort and familiarity, now looked foreign, cold, calculating, and distant. The love she had once felt for him felt like a distant memory, replaced by a gut-wrenching betrayal. Yet, as she searched his eyes, she saw something else too: fear, guilt, and perhaps even regret. It was clear that he wasn't the man she had thought he was, but that didn't mean he wasn't still human. In the end, Alice realized, even the most complicated people could be caught in their own web of lies. Her heart raced, her mind working through the chaos of emotions flooding her. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers for all the pain and confusion he had caused her. But something in her stilled her, an understanding that this was no longer just about her father's betrayal. This was about the larger truth that had been hidden in the shadows all along. The conspiracy wasn't just about her or her family. It was a far-reaching plot that had entwined countless lives, pulling strings from behind closed doors. Alice had been a pawn, yes, but so had so many others. Her father was a player in a game far bigger than any of them, and in the end, even he had been caught in its grip. As she processed this, a part of her began to feel the weight of responsibility settling in. She had to make a choice now: let the past define her, or use it to propel her forward. The fight she had been forced into wasn't over. It wasn't about revenge or anger anymore, but about exposing the truth. The lives that had been destroyed by this conspiracy deserved answers, and Alice wasn't going to let it end in silence. She looked up at her father, who stood there, still holding the weight of his choices in his eyes. "You've hurt so many people," Alice said, her voice steady, but filled with a sadness that cut deep. "But there's still time to make things right." Her father's face twitched with emotion, but he said nothing. His silence spoke volumes, and Alice knew then that he was beyond redemption. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and no matter what he said now, the damage was done. But even in that moment of overwhelming betrayal, a small part of Alice's heart ached for him. After all, he was still her father. "I'll expose everything," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "It's the only way to make sure this never happens again." The rest of the night passed in a blur of chaotic events, and by the time dawn broke, the truth had been laid bare for all to see. The conspiracy, once carefully hidden, was now exposed. People who had been complicit, who had turned a blind eye, were held accountable for their roles in the deception. But for Alice, the battle was only just beginning. She had won, but at what cost? The people she had trusted, the ones who had promised her safety, had all betrayed her in one way or another. The scars from this ordeal would take years to heal, if they ever did. And yet, in the midst of all the pain, Alice found something else: strength. Strength to continue, to push forward, to stand up for the truth, no matter what. But just as she was about to leave, a final twist occurred. As she was walking away from the wreckage of the warehouse, her phone buzzed. A message. It was a simple one. "You're not done yet, Alice. We're watching." A chill ran down her spine, and her blood turned cold. Who could it be? And what did they want? The mystery wasn't over, not by a long shot. Alice looked out over the city, the horizon bathed in the soft glow of the morning light. There was no going back. She had uncovered the truth, but the fight was far from over. She would never be free of the shadows that loomed over her, never able to escape the past that had shaped her. But one thing was certain. She would keep fighting, keep searching for the answers, no matter how deep the darkness went. She had been pushed to the edge, but now she stood taller than ever, ready to face whatever came next. And so, as Alice walked into the uncertain future, the lingering question remained: who is truly in control, and who is still being manipulated in the shadows? The answers were out there, waiting to be uncovered, and Alice was the only one who could find them.